So I've got a few principles. Let me just start out, I think, with just the first one, and let's just kick off from there. Because again, I'm not used to doing this. I don't really do this in my classroom or ever. But let's just start off from there. So we pulled this is our bulletin from a few weeks ago, right around the 4th of July. And our pastor was actually quoting the emeritus Archbishop of Philadelphia, a guy named Charles Chaput. And basically, in summary, says that the idea of political parties, it can amount to idolatry if you let it become that. It can overwhelm you. And, these people who say they don't really believe in any religion, and yet they're really highly political. They have their own, social justice issues that they care about, or their own political issues, whether it be abortion, whether gay rights, whether it be the environment. It doesn't matter, but they all rally around this certain thing and effort. And he was saying, they may not be religious, but they do all carry this. They say it's the latest installment in a very old Gnostic fairy tale. Gnosticism is the idea that you have this secret knowledge, and Gnosticism is heresy alongside Christianity in the very first couple centuries. Basically was the idea that in order to become a Christian, you had to have this very secret knowledge. And so he's using Gnosticism in a very loose way, saying that Gnostic in the sense that, we have this secret knowledge. We know a certain thing. Well, Gnostic in what way? Why is it a Gnostic fairy tale? Because he says the modern is a Gnostic religious zealot, whether he calls himself, he says, the modern Gnostic zealot, whether he calls himself fascist, Nazi, Marxist, or even a certain brand progressive, is never really irreligious. He's certainly not an unbeliever, even when he says he is. He's a particular kind of believer, a man convinced he has this secret knowledge. And there it is, the gnosis, that secret knowledge, the gnosis that unlocks the power to fix a broken world. And he clings to that sacred knowledge just as religiously as any 14th century monk clung to his Bible. The difference, of course, is as a Christian, as Father Michael says here, Christian, his God is true, and the God of the Gnostic isn't. So as a Christian, I think the first principle here is, this political partisanship, this can become a deep form of idolatry. And that was his point in the whole letter from him that week during 4th of July. It can become a form of idolatry. Idolatry is one of the oldest and first sins. Think back to just the Genesis and Exodus accounts. Exodus with the golden calf in the desert with the Israelites after they left Egypt, Sodom and Gomorrah, Tower of Babel, and Lot. All of these stories feature idolatry at its center. Human beings who are worshiping things other than God, the true living God. And so as we think of that, don't let this politics, although you can think of it as a beautiful thing that can come about in a nice world order and everything, don't forget what is really, truly important, and that's your identity as a Christian. Don't make this your identity. And along with that, as I said, yes, it's a form of idolatry, but don't forget your first vocation, your first calling from God, and that's to live out your baptism. It's to be this party or that party, or pursue this certain agenda or this specific platform or what have you. It's to live out your vocation, to live out your baptism as a believer and have that as your core identity in Christ. Now, that said, my second point I want to discuss is this. There were saints in the Catholic Church throughout history who were political. For example, Joan of Arc and Thomas More, St. Joan of Arc, St. Thomas More. Yeah, they were highly political. So this doesn't preclude the possibility of you as a Christian being political. It's totally acceptable and permissible within Christian thinking. But you have to remember, these people were not political first. They were Christians first. They kept that as their core identity. So think of that as I'm saint first, right? That is to live out my baptism, to try to become a saint, to try to be the holiest, not in any self-righteous way, but to try to, become a saint. I want to lead people to Christ. I want to please God. And so these people lived that out through extreme forms of charity and love and holiness. Now, so this doesn't preclude the idea that you could still be political, but again, going back to the first point, you need to live out your baptism and find your identity in Christ first and foremost. Now, there were some Catholics recently and throughout history who were excommunicated or refused communion because of certain positions they held. For example, most recently, of course, if you promote abortion, this is seen as very antithetical to Catholic teaching. Again, to be excommunicated is not a stamp of, hey, you're going to hell now. This is a public acknowledgement, recognition, and like a public announcement from the church saying what this person is doing in their public official capacity is not in line with church teaching, although they are claiming to be Catholic. So, in other words, it's as if you were a scientist and you go out there and start saying some wild stuff that's anti-scientific. I'm sure that some board out there would say, well, they're not actually speaking in their capacity, so we don't recognize it, right? So that's what they're doing. So there's always a possibility to come back from excommunication, but this is quite responsible on the Catholic Church, I think, to acknowledge this and not just, let people just be whatever they want to be, to acknowledge this and say, no, we have a lot of people under our umbrella that we need to be responsible for their care and salvation. And so we are taking that stewardship seriously, and we're going to guide them in the right direction. So now, here is another thing I want to consider. Here's another principle. You can think of this as the third principle, or however you're counting. Don't lose friends or family over this. In a year, in 4 years, first of all, 4 years, you'll get another president. So if you don't like this one, wait 4 years or 8 years, but you'll get another president. There will be time, right? I think, well, that's a long time. Well, I'm saying in 4 years, this probably won't matter as much as you think it does. It's a good rule of thumb, by the way, in any situation. I like to think of this. If you are like really anxious about something, if you're really concerned, if you have something that's just terribly bothering you, I recommend, it's what I try to do in my own life, to think ahead a year and think, is this going to bother me in a year? Am I really going to care about this a year from now? And if not, then it's probably, general rule of thumb, not something I need to worry about. So, and relationships are really what matter in the grand scheme of things. So do not burn bridges with people that you love because of things like this, right? Just, so you might say, well, it's so important. It's so important. Well, I was thinking about this the other day because my wife had a friend who was just really, really terribly anxious over the possibility of some candidate becoming president. And that, she was just really flustered by this. Well, what's going to happen? Oh no, what's going to happen? You can get this really kind of position of you're just a wreck. You can't function. And I thought about that and I'm thinking, well, this friend of hers works in local government. And so she's actually pretty close to, but still pretty far removed from, but enough far removed that who cares who the president is? If you're in local government in DC, you're in the district, you're not in the federal. And then if you are in the federal, you might be over in the judicial or the legislative, not the executive. So it may not matter to you as much, or you just may be over in, I don't know, humanitarian aid section or the tax law or something. So it may not. So, but in any case, she was a few steps removed from, who became president, let's say. And I thought about this analogy with my own job, thinking, well, I'm an adjunct. I teach at a university. There have been a few times over the 10 or so years I taught at a university that we've gotten a new president, but that I never cared about. That never bothered me. And yet, that was so much less remote. It was so more proximate in my world, like as far as having impact on things I cared about, like, oh, they may cut funding to this department. Oh, we might not get a hire line or something like that. And yet it never crossed my mind. I didn't care who was the president of my university. Or you can think about this in your own job. Who the president or CEO or whoever is in your company, does that really bother you all that much? And if it doesn't, then think about why you care about the president of the United States so much. I mean, this big project is meant to be long-lasting, and we don't have monarchs that last a lifetime. So this is something that probably you shouldn't put as much weight on it as you do. So something just to consider. Now, when I do talk about this in class, this next point, because I do assign this piece. It's actually, I've got the book somewhere on my shelf back here, but the book is a whole complete study. I just have students read a couple of book reviews of the book, and they're short so that they don't even have to read the whole study. The study is like the sociological study that's very long, over a 10-year period. So, who wants to read that whole thing? But the book reviews are quite short. And there's one by Naomi Schaefer Riley, and there's one by David Brooks. And I'm just referring to Naomi Schaefer Riley one right now. This was printed in First Things. David Brooks was printed in the New York Times. And this came out in 2018. The study was, you can look this up. It's done by Christian Smith out of Notre Dame. And he's a sociologist, and it's a wide-ranging study on the spiritual beliefs and moral beliefs of young people. And so I usually sign this like on the first week, and I say, I really hope this makes you mad. What do you think? Do you think they're right? Do you think this is true? Do you think these criticisms are legitimate? Because what they'll show is that it's a very bleak picture of young people and their beliefs about morality. Like, they don't seem to be very informed about moral issues or informed about political issues. They don't care. And of course, since it's about religious beliefs, moral beliefs, it's not in particular about political beliefs, but they do mention political beliefs because political, as you might remember from when we went over the taxonomy of philosophy chart, which is on a different video, the political is sort of a subset of ethics. It's about the good. It's about the good of the community. And let's see, this, she writes, I'll just quote her. Oh, and about that widespread heralding after the 2008 election, Obama, about a new generation of politically active youth, Smith and his colleagues call this idea sheer fiction. They find no more than 1 out of every 25 respondents to be engaged in politics in any meaningful way. 1 in 25 respondents. That's really low. So, right, sheer fiction that young people in particular, are more active. I think just people in general also. This is just about young people in particular. But 1 in 25. And then I ask my students, you guys think this is true? Let's talk about this. And then I'll have them, okay, raise your hand if you have voted. And then most actually, maybe like half, maybe 3/4, maybe, will raise their hand. But then I'll say, it all hinges on what you mean by meaningful, engaged in politics in a meaningful way. So I say, well, voting, and we will talk about that in a sec, which I do with them. Voting seems kind of the bare minimum you could do. Has anybody done anything else? Like, people, march in marches, protests and stuff. Has anybody done that? And there may be like 4 who raise their hand. And I've got a class of like 35 here. And then I like to give them a couple of tests. I said, name the mayor of our town. And like 2 people can do that. Or name our 2 state senators. And then nobody can do that. Nobody. Maybe 1 person. 1 out of 35 people, which is really stark and kind of stunning that, they thought, as Naomi Schaefer Riley says here, they thought they were really active, right? And I say, look, it feels like you're being really active. You're getting on social media. You're saying these things. You're saying your piece. You're sharing stuff on social media. You are voting if you even do that. But are you really doing anything in a meaningful way? Are you making it what makes a difference? Okay. So then I ask them, if, of course, if they don't know their state senators' names, well, maybe they've written to them. Maybe they forgot their name or something. So I ask them, has anybody written to them? Maybe one out of 3 or 4 classes that day had, and so I say, what do you think is more effective, voting or writing to your state senator or representative? And of course, they all agree that writing directly to someone would be much more impactful than voting. And I agree with this as well. I think that's much more powerful. So I asked them, well, why do you do that? Then I ask them, what do you think is more effective? Do you think voting is more effective or something else? Like, what else could you do? And some of them say, well, I've helped campaign or something. I say, okay, well, that's kind of effective. So let's talk about this vote thing. Is that effective? Right? Is that effective at all? Let's first talk about the marching. Is that effective? And a lot of people feel like it is. We're close to DC, and I say, you know what, guys, is it really effective though? Because you march one week for one cause, and then the next week, the opposite cause marches in the same streets in front of the same people for the opposite thing. So what have you actually done? And then I asked them, those of you who have marched, there might be like 4 to 6 of them in each class, what happened after you marched? And they don't know. They don't really know what to say. None of them know what happened. It felt good, almost like posting on social media. So, okay, let's talk about voting. Is that effective? And I have a hard time believing that voting is effective, honestly. And this is where I'm going to kind of lose some people. I wouldn't recommend not voting, but this is what I want to say. I wouldn't say don't vote, because here's why. I think one single vote does not matter. My vote does not matter. In fact, I've never voted in any election whatsoever, ever, not even school elections, let alone for president. Why? Because it doesn't matter. One person doesn't matter. But if I were to get on here on a public platform in front of my students and recommend them all to not vote and try to influence that way, well, certainly then that would actually influence more votes and would weigh more heavily, as you can see the math, the way it works out. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. I'm not saying that. I'm not advocating. But I will say that I don't vote. Well, why don't I vote? Because mathematically, it doesn't make sense. And then I ask my students this. I say, look, let's think about the voting at all. Okay, we thought about whether it's effective and whether it's efficient, whether it makes a difference. And I ask them, what is a vote anyway? Do you have a right to vote or do you have a duty to vote? Which do you think that is? And they're kind of perplexed by that. They know that it's often, formed in terms of right to vote. So they're like, yeah, it's got to be that. But they also feel like, well, it's kind of a duty to vote in some way. And I say, well, it's a right to vote, not a duty to vote. It's not a duty, because a duty means that it's an obligation. Okay? It is not a duty for you to vote. So in other words, if you were required to vote, that would be a duty to vote. If you don't have a civic duty, you might have a moral duty to vote, whatever that stems from, but then you'd have to defend what it means to have a moral duty to vote. But you don't have a civic duty to vote. There's nothing in law that requires you to vote. You're not obligated. You're not going to be put in jail because you didn't vote. But you have a right to vote. And you can either exercise that right or refrain from exercising that. Just like freedom of speech. I'm not required to speak. It's not a duty that I do so, but I have a right to do it if I would like to. So I can either exercise that duty or just opt not to exercise it. So voting is like that. And there's a difference between positive rights and negative rights. Positive rights, let's see if I can remember this again. Positive, I think one is where the state must give you this thing. But a negative right is where the state cannot restrict you from exercising this thing. So I think negative right would be the correct classification for right to vote. Because if it were a positive right, it would. Let's think about this with respect to guns, like gun rights. Guns would not be a positive right because the government's not required to like supply you with a gun, but it's a negative right such that if you wanted to avail yourself and purchase a gun, you have the opportunity to do that. In other words, they won't stop you. Much the same with freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom of religion. They're not required to give you these things to, like if freedom of speech or freedom of the press, they're not required to supply you with a newspaper and sign you up and get you an editorship position so that you can exercise your freedom of speech. And if they don't, they're in violation of that. It's a negative right such that they can't stop you if you wanted to exercise it. So I think voting, the right to vote, is probably a negative right, but it is a little bit of a positive right as well, only because they do go out of their way to open up booths, to provide mail-in ballots and that sort of thing. But in the actual essence of the thing, I think it's a negative right because they're not actually required to do those things. They're just making it easier. They can't stop you if you wanted to vote. So it's a mix. It's interesting. In any case, you are not required to vote. So one thing that really irritates, pisses my students off, like I said, I hope this makes you mad, because the article that I mentioned from Naomi Shipper Riley begins like this. She said, a few years, an intern came to me with what he no doubt thought was an exciting new idea for a piece about the youth vote. And then, get out the message, MTV, and she said, as editors go, this intern brought this to her, I don't think I have a reputation for being curmudgeonly. On this particular occasion, I could hardly contain myself. She said, frankly, I don't want the youth to vote. They don't own property, they don't pay taxes, and they don't have kids to send to school. They have no financial stake and little moral stake in society. Until they do, I prefer they stay the heck away from the polls. She says, okay, maybe I was a little harsh. And students really don't like this. How dare they try to take away our right to vote? And I say, look, of course, that's what they construe it as. They read this and they're like, how dare she? They can't take the youth's right away to vote. It's almost like, they recall, in their short memories, back from high school or something, the civil rights movement, and they're thinking, oh, they can't take away our rights, the rights to vote, or, with women, the right to vote. Oh, they can't take away young people's rights. I think that's what they're doing. But I said, that's not what she's advocating for. If you read what she's actually saying, she just tell them to not vote, which is completely consistent with just what I've discussed here. You're not required to vote. And then we looked at the statistics in this this article, this book review, and they say a certain number are uninformed and a certain number are apathetic. So apathetic segment of the population, what they describe as apathetic, happening more in the quarter of the interviews. And this is actually a very good in-depth study. It's what they call a longitudinal study. It happens over 10 years. And they would check in with these people as they grew up, not just like, if you had asked me what I thought at 12 years old, I don't even know what I would say, politically speaking. But they didn't just do that. They asked them over a 10-year period and checked in at least 4 times with them and had in-depth interviews. And so they were able to get these findings that 25% of them were apathetic when it came to politics. And another 13% they called uninformed based on the answers. So added together, if my math is correct, that's 38%. And then I say to students, who are really upset about reading this, I say, look, they're not saying that most young people are like this, first of all. Nobody said that. But I look at the number, 38% are like this. That's a disturbing portion of people who either don't know what they're talking about or don't care about these issues. And I say, imagine you go up there and you spend all your time, researching the issues for 4 years, researching the candidates and really getting in depth, reading everything you could possibly read. You're informed, you walk up there and then you see on your side, the guy on the other line, he slept outside, he's homeless and hung over, and he's just kind of stumbling to the polls. He's got just as much as right as you to be there, and his vote counts just as much weight as yours does. And in effect, if he votes opposite you, you guys cancel each other out. Like, is that fair? And it doesn't seem like it's very fair at all. It seems terrible. So if you had people who, let's suppose, are uninformed, don't know anything about these issues, and don't care about these issues, do you want them to vote? And eventually the students, I get them to say, no, I wouldn't. And so I'm saying, that's what she said. Why are you mad at what she said? Because their vote cancels out your vote. And what are some of these things? Well, what she mentioned. They don't own property, they don't pay taxes, they don't have kids to send to school. So why should people who don't do these things have a vote about these issues? Let's imagine I'm in my 30s and I don't know that much about retirement savings or Social Security payouts or anything like that. Or I was never in the military. Let's take another example. I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about what do you even call it? I know some people are yelling at the screen now. My dad, particularly. What are those called? You get a payout. You know what I'm talking about, right? It'll come to me after. You get your payout, but I've never been in the military. Why should I be the one to vote on that issue about what people receive or don't receive? Or if it has to do with retirement savings or Social Security. Yeah, I'm going to be there in several years, but why am I voting on the issue now when I don't have a clue what a 0.7% increase means on an percent of what? I don't know. I don't know these issues at all. So why should I be voting on these issues? Why should I be voting on property taxes when I don't own property? So you can see where I'm getting. So her point was, if you have people who don't have a stake in this, I asked them, is there an opportunity to leave certain things blank if you just don't know? Or should there be an option, the bubble-in option? Of course, like I said, I mentioned I've never voted before. I don't know what it's like. I mean, I wouldn't want to just leave it blank and have somebody come behind me and then fill it in for me. So shouldn't there be an option? I know there's some write-in ballots. You can write in what you want, but shouldn't there be an option for something like, I don't know? I think there are some in some states and some jurisdictions, maybe in some countries, that do this. But I think that should be more common, because you're going to have a lot of people who don't know about certain issues, or they're not informed enough to vote. And maybe there's, like some people I know this year, they just want to stay away from the media circus just for their own mental health and sanity of mind. They don't want to have that constant cycle keep going. So they just turn the TV off. They tune all that stuff out. So if that's you, if that's the next person beside you, right? And if you are the person who has studied all this stuff, you don't want that person voting opposite you and then canceling out your vote. It's just not fair. So again, you are not required to vote. So if you even have the slightest notion that you might not really know that much about an issue, probably, if possible, should never vote on that issue. It seems really obvious to me. I don't know why more people don't do that. You have more impact in smaller elections. I think that this is true just given the mathematics of the thing. You're bigger, you're smaller pond, right? So, and then, these same students, I asked them, how many people have voted in, well, did you vote in a presidential election? They're all like, because that's the one that's the popularity contest. But who votes in small elections? And I remind them that all these political theorists, especially the ancient ones like Aristotle, Plato, and so on. And I remind them, how big ancient Athens was? Probably about 100,000 warm bodies. People. That's about the size of a city, maybe. That's what they took the polis to be, from where we get our word politics, polis. The city-state was just, that was the state, the sovereign state. Their country was just a city. And so for them, giving these principles about politics, they had no idea, could not fathom a state or a city the size of 330 plus million people like we have in the US. So how do these principles apply? Would they apply? But we know that you can have much more impact in smaller elections. And so that's where it really matters. Small elections, local elections, even your community, your neighborhood, that's where things really matter. It's almost like the same principle with, Mother Teresa would say this, not to, if people felt maybe guilty that they didn't go and halfway around the world to serve Christ, and go to India and become a missionary like she did, they felt kind of guilty. What can I do, Mother? And she said, well, you be Christ to your own family. You be Christ in your own community, in your own neighborhood. That's where it starts. And a pastor worth their salt, I'm sure, has had a sermon about this at some point. You make an impact where you can. That's where you change the world, because that's your world. Now, one last thing is this. If you are voting, I recommend as a principle, as a Christian, to vote your conscience. Now, I said vote your conscience. And what about single party? Sorry, what about what are those called? Single issue voters, like one topic voters. Like, for example, abortion. I think is probably the biggest one, or maybe it might have been like LGBT stuff. That people, they'll focus in on just one topic and they'll say this is the thing. Like if the party or if the politician votes this, then okay, I'm just gonna. I don't care about the tax stuff that they support. I don't care about foreign policy. I don't care about any of that. If they support this, I'm going for it. I don't really know what I think about that. I think that with certain issues, it's of absolute grave importance. And I think abortion is one of those things. I think it's extremely unfortunate that the Republican Party has, after decades of having this on their platform publicly, they have dropped this issue from the platform. I think that's really tragic and really unfortunate. And I know it's just for political stratagem, but I think it's really, really tragic. And because I think that, I'm actually writing a paper currently with a student of mine on this. So maybe I can link that to this video later. But if it's an issue like abortion, and we haven't talked about abortion on this channel yet, but especially if you're Catholic, you should know how grave an issue this is. This is like modern day Holocaust. This is modern day eugenics. This is something I believe that we'll look back on in decades from now and say, how could people do that? Just like we do with the Holocaust now, or with slavery. So I think if it's a grave issue like that, concerning the murder of people, I don't think that it would be that unwise if that were the single party issue that really tilted you one way or the other. I think that's just my intuition on this. And I don't see many other issues out there like that. And especially now, since Public Party has officially dropped it from the platform, unfortunately. In any case, that I think is all I have to cover. And like I said, I don't know everything there is to know about voting, but I want to just share some of the experiences that I have in class and with students as we cover certain statistics. And I wanted to sort of outline some things like duties and rights, voting, and some principles that maybe you can take along the way and help you when you go to the voting booth. I'm not going to tell you to vote for, but for up to me, Fallon Timberlake, 2016. I love this shirt. It's like probably the only time you'll ever see me wear a t-shirt. I never wear a t-shirt when I teach, of course. It's like the wardrobe makes the man. And so I don't feel like I'm really in teaching mode. And this is probably why I've been so but hopefully it's imperceptible to you. didn't bother you all that much. But in any case, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to wear, Jimmy Fallon, Justin Timberlake. And yeah, I don't think this was ever a serious thing, but this is like the first year Trump was elected, so everybody was totally against it. In any case, that is all we have. So until next time.